Hello and welcome to the Clean Air Report Ghana, the podcast where we unpack the invisible crisis shaping our health, our future, and even how long we live. I am Michael Asharley, your host. But before we dive in, let's start with a quick quiz. Globally, what do you think takes more years of human life expectancy? HIV/AIDS, cigarette smoking, or air pollution? Think about it for a second. I'll give you the answer in a bit. The truth is, it's air pollution, and that's why today's episode matters. The latest Air Quality Life Index report from the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago, EPIC, shows that particulate pollution is the greatest external threat to human life expectancy. It's cutting more years from our lives than HIV/AIDS, tobacco use, alcohol, unsafe water, or even road accidents. To unpack this data and what it means for Ghana, I spoke to Tanushree Ganguly, Director of the AQLI at the University of Chicago. And trust me, the numbers are striking, even frightening. So, Tanushree, let's start with the big picture. What are the key highlights and takeaways from the newly released AQLI 2025 report that the public should pay close attention to?
Right. So I think what I've done is I've distilled the findings of the report into three key findings, which honestly for me stood out this time. And we've been putting out these AQLI reports since 2018. So one thing that has come out clearly in every edition of the report, and that's sort of key finding number one, is that this is not said enough, but particulate pollution is the greatest external threat to human life expectancy globally, which means that particulate pollution cuts off more years from human life compared to, some other well-known risks like alcohol consumption, malnutrition, unsafe water and sanitation, or even traffic injuries. So sort of one big finding is that air pollution is the greatest external threat to human life expectancy across the world. So that's one. The second finding is that regions which have most to gain from cleaner air. When I say most to gain, I mean most to gain in terms of life expectancy. So the regions where, the highest gains in terms of life expectancy are possible from breathing cleaner air are also regions which really don't have the kind of data that they need, to diagnose pollution problems or to take preemptive action against pollution episodes or even to ensure that people are taking protective measures against higher level of pollution. So we found out this time in our report that over 5 billion people around the world, that's more than 60% of the global population, they live in regions which actually don't have adequate monitoring infrastructure if you look at sort of global standards on what is the minimum monitoring requirement. So that's the large data gap that exists when it comes to monitoring and measuring air quality. And the third one, which is very interesting, and this was probably the most surprising result that we had, particularly in this year's report, is that we saw the highest increase come from very unexpectedly US and Canada. And these increases are primarily because of climate change-induced wildfires. So these rampant wildfires are basically putting countries which have put in efforts to clean their pollution at risk.
Let's bring this home to West Africa. We are often ranked among the most polluted regions. How is West Africa reflected in this year's report?
Right. So what we're seeing in terms of West Africa, if you look at the regional average, so on average, people around the region or across all West African countries are at the risk of losing 1.1 years of their life due to air pollution. That does not seem much, but it's still a lot if you look at, some of the other parts of the world which have managed to clean up their pollution level. So 1.1 years if we look at, the regional average. But if we now start looking at specific countries, so for instance, I'm looking at the data for Cameroon, people there are losing nearly 3 years of their life because of air pollution. This is actually comparable to the kind of impact that we're seeing in certain countries in South Asia. In Nigeria, we are seeing close to 2 years lost due to air pollution. Again, very comparable to the global average and significantly higher than what most people in the world are exposed to. So if we look at the Western region in particular, Western African region, these are the two countries where we are seeing the highest impacts. Now, the second question is a little more interesting, which is what makes the situation in West Africa so unique, which is simply the lack of data in this region. And why this is important is because what we are seeing in terms of impacts on life expectancy are derived through satellite estimates. And these satellite estimates also rely on what data is available through ground monitoring data. So without ground monitoring data, we also are a little uncertain about how close we are to the actual kind of pollution levels that people are breathing in this part of the world. So it's highly likely that I'm saying that, people in Ghana are losing 9.6 months of their life expectancy because of air pollution, but the true burden of pollution could be much higher, and that would only become visible if more data is generated for the region.
Let me take you a few steps backwards before we proceed. When you talk about years of life lost, what does that really mean in practical terms?
Yeah, so what it really means is that, let's say, so in Ghana, the average annual pollution concentration is about 12 microgram per meter cube. That's what satellite-derived estimates tell us. Now, if the pollution in Ghana were reduced, and let me just rephrase this, were permanently reduced to meet the WHO guideline, which is 5 microgram per meter cube, then the life expectancy of each of Ghana's residents could go up by 9.6 months, assuming that the 12.9 is permanently reduced to meet the 5 microgram per meter cube target. So this does not mean that, let's say you were exposed to high levels of pollution for a few months in a year, that you end up losing, 9.6 months of your life. What we are saying is that if you are exposed to these pollution levels over a sustained period, over a long duration, then pollution puts you at the risk of losing 9.6 months of your life expectancy.
So let's dig deeper. What does the data really tell us about the air we breathe here in Ghana?
In Ghana, based on the kind of pollution levels that we have in our database, we're seeing that on average, an average resident of Ghana is likely to lose 10 months of their life expectancy as a result of air pollution. All of this is actually based on the monitoring data that's available for Ghana or the available air quality data. So based on what we have, we're not seeing the kind of variation that we see, let's say, in other parts of the world in terms of impact. So even if we look at the most polluted regions in Ghana, there people are likely to lose about 1 year of their life expectancy.
What does the data from where you sit tell you about the quality of air in Ghana in itself?
So it tells me that the quality of air in Ghana is definitely unsafe because the levels are, more than 2 times the kind of levels that the WHO prescribes as the safe limit. And again, one important thing about AQLI is that we eliminate the natural fraction of particulate matter. So what you're seeing right now is entirely the anthropogenic fraction of particulate matter. Now, if we add on dust to it, for instance, that could also significantly increase the total PM2.5 concentrations, further adding to the pollution burden. So based on the evidence that we have, what's very clear is that the burden of pollution is significant, primarily because pollution levels are almost double that of what the WHO prescribes as safe.
Interesting. So to get you right, it means that as compared to other data that include, for instance, the Harmattan season where you have dust blowing from the Sahara Desert all the way to Ghana, in your data, you have managed to segregate that and taking that out of it.
This is entirely anthropogenic. Exactly. So that's precisely why we very purposely actually eliminate the natural fraction, because through our results, what we want to show is that if you were to reduce this anthropogenic fraction, which is actually within control, then this is the kind of improvement that you can see in life expectancy of your residents.
Regionally, though, do we see difference across the country?
Yes, so OT and Ashanti region are where we are seeing the most highest impact of air pollution. So people are losing about 1 year of their life expectancy in this region. And one thing that really caught my eye was that particularly in the Ashanti region, between 1998 and 2023, so in this sort of period of 26 years, pollution has increased by almost 20%.
Ghana's parliament has just introduced a new air quality management regulation. How significant is this step?
And what we've seen, in different parts of the world, whether it's in the US, whether it's in China, in every country where a standard has been set, what is followed is introduction of a robust set of policies to ensure that that standard is met. And in the process of introduction of those robust policies, air quality has improved, thereby, lengthening people's life expectancy. So the standard is the milestone. What happens after the standard is introduced is most critical, because once a standard is legislatively mandated, it puts pressure on sectors to get their act in order so that that standard could be met. So yeah, that's what I feel, that setting that annual standard would be very critical in Ghana's journey towards achieving cleaner air.
And finally, what should policymakers and ordinary Ghanaians listening now take away from this report?
So here's the thing, right? Like something that I tell everyone, like from my parents to my friends to people I work with, consume the data, right? I think because it's data and it's numbers, a lot of people shy away from consuming it, but it's very important to actually consume this information. And I think the third thing about at an individual level, of course, is also acknowledging that you have a role to play in addressing air pollution, right? Like unless and until there is demand from people for policymakers to act on air pollution, this would never go up on, national agendas of countries. So I think people have a role in expressing that they want access to cleaner air to live better lives. Many countries around the world focus on generating data, but then don't know what to do with it, right? So the first piece is to actively integrate data into decision making. What are you doing with that data becomes very, very important. The second is follow the science on where pollution is coming from. There are source attribution studies which are being conducted, and these studies, they generate wealth of information on which are the most polluting causes of pollution in a region. And the third is, of course, it's great that the Parliament in Ghana has already introduced the air quality management regulation. The focus now should be on ensuring that the provisions in that law are robustly enforced. So yeah, those are the three things which I think policymakers should take note of.
That's the takeaway. Air pollution isn't just an environmental problem. It's a public health emergency, and it's one we can no longer afford to ignore. The air you breathe is shaping how long you live. It's invisible, but it's still powerful, and it's stealing years from us. That's why it's so important to prioritize clean air, not just for ourselves, but for the generations coming after us. If you found this podcast eye-opening, kindly share it with a friend. Drop us a rating and let's keep the conversation going, because clean air is everyone's business. I am Michael Asharley, and this is Clean Air Report Ghana on Joy FM. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and remember, every breath counts.